How difficult is it to get a job in the cannabis industry or in any other industry if you've had a prior conviction, for a marijuana related offense? And what can complicate that? What can complicate the process of receiving meaningful employment?
Well, the employment issue, I think, is about to get exponentially worse in this country. And so we're dealing with, if you have a federal job, the ability to get a job with a medical marijuana conviction is a lot less likely on the state level, depending on the employer and the extent of background checks. I mean, we recently saw Biden's campaign, and I don't know the full details about it, but they released, I believe it was 5 members for, using cannabis. And that's surprising considering his campaign, was part of, especially as vice president, launching and legalizing potentially cannabis in this country. So those types of things are still a problem. I foresee either further issues with regards to hemp and employment testing. I actually have a friend right now. He has a case that was broken down to a misdemeanor. He can't get housing anywhere. He's trying to move. So this continues to have significant effect on people. Anybody in Florida, in most states, they have certain background checks that are required as a result of, federal or state law with regards to getting into the cannabis or hemp industry. And some of these marijuana convictions and charges will also prevent people from getting involved in that. So it really does have a huge effect, not only on jobs and employment, but also housing and other services that people are avoiding to get. We've been doing expungement clinics throughout the state. And every time we do one, I hear a different story about someone who is impacted in a different way, as a result. And even now with the banking, we had a friend recently, she works for a cannabis entity, and the bank didn't want to use her financial information as part of the loan because it was associated with the cannabis industry, and hoping the Banking Act will pass here in the U.S. and change that in the near future. So there are a lot of problems associated with it that unfortunately, despite the legalization, despite the vast, and we have medical marijuana in Florida in our constitutional amendment, employers still don't allow it or consider it the same as you having used a Percocet or any other prescription medication. So we are moving in the right direction, but we do have a long way to go.
And just to follow that up, and maybe I can address this one to Natalie or whoever else wants to chime in here, but what are some of the challenges with actually getting records expunged? I know some states have pushed for automatic expungement, but the process is easier said than done for those who have this on the record. So what are some of the challenges around that? And what is some of the legislation that you see that could rectify that situation?
Of course. So thank you for sort of touching on the barriers to employment that come alongside a cannabis related arrest or a conviction. And just for, a few more stats, an arrest for anything, and it's even for something as low level as, marijuana possession, for example, you see average annual wages decrease up to 40% annually. So you're not only making it so that people are perhaps legally or regulatorily barred from accessing employment opportunities in the state regulated industry, you're making it so people are de facto barred from accessing any sort of stable living wage employment. So instead of, we're seeing the number of collateral consequences accompanied by criminal legal system involvement number into the 10,000s, if we're being totally honest. And that's not just employment, that's access to public assistance, that's access to educational loans that may be federally backed. So it's not just as simple as you get arrested and perhaps you have a sort of horrible night in jail or two. If it's low level, you can quite literally be sentenced to a lifetime of poverty for doing something that others are making millions of dollars doing. And so that's why at the Lost Prisoner Project, and one of the focus of the policy work I do is ensuring retroactive relief for people who have those cannabis related convictions. And oftentimes that comes in the form of expungement. And one of the issues with expungement is typically, though not always, and we're seeing different legislatures tackle this issue in a more progressive way, but the onus is on the individual to sort of lobby the bureaucracy for that relief. And when that happens, it often means the individual in question has to incur very costly legal fees. You have to hire an attorney. You may have to take off work several days to sort of go to the courthouse. You're sort of privy to the whims of a judge or another criminal legal system authority. And that means we see a huge uptake gap, the number of people who may be eligible for expungement through some sort of process and the number of people who are actually able to access that legal relief. And which is why when we do think expungement should be part and parcel of any adult use or even a medical use legalization scheme, because what Daylin sort of touched on is it's not just that the enforcement of cannabis laws in this country have been disproportionately directed towards low-income Black and Brown communities. It's that the very origin of the law was really couched in racist and xenophobic intent. So I won't go too deep into this, but cannabis, indica, Indian hemp was totally legal in the United States until around the 1930s. And then we saw a few opportunists who harbored some problematic views, should we say, use cannabis as sort of a political cudgel. They used it as a way to demonize certain communities as a way of consolidating their own political power. So it's not just the enforcement has been disproportionate. The entire sort of conception of marijuana prohibition in this country has been really rooted in a desire for social control of certain populations. So we don't think that which is a long way of saying expungement should be part and parcel of this. An automated expungement in which bureaucratic authorities have to do that process without the individual petitioning is the best way to gain that desperately needed legal relief and to make sure people aren't incurring even more cost, whether they're emotional or actual financial costs, in order to restore their sort of full citizenship in so many ways.
Yeah, and if I could just respond on that as well. In Florida, it takes a year to do, and exactly what she was talking about. And I've been speaking to people who are doing clinics in other states just to kind of work together on it, the best ways and to get these done. And they've been talking about it, how easy it is, from my perspective, in a lot of other states now because of these changes in laws and things, to be able to do these expungements. In Florida, it takes a minimum of a year to get done. Typically, it's automatically granted after you get an approval from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, but it takes a significant period of time. So it's really difficult for people. So if they do apply for a job and that's the only thing holding them back, it's not like they can just go and get it done in a couple of weeks. It's a year-long process and prevents them from moving forward with their life in a lot of circumstances. And that's why we're doing everything we can to kind of help people to change that.
Absolutely. Alisia, I wanted to turn to you. I mean, Natalie and Michael touched on some of the challenges that people with marijuana arrests face, both the debt burden, the time it takes, and as well as all the other resulting impacts from that. But Alisia, what is the industry's role in helping to rectify this? Obviously, the industry is looking to make money off of something that has been criminalized for decades, since the 1930s, as Natalie said. So I'm wondering what the industry's role is and what you've seen that has worked and that has not worked so well in your experience.
Sure. So I'm blown away by a lot of the things that the panel has already really touched on, because this is such a hot topic, specifically with what's going on at the ground level, within businesses. And, what Natalie was saying is huge about just the systemic way that things were engineered from the very beginning. I mean, if you look back into the history, just past prohibition, and like she was saying, it was definitely legal here in the United States. And, you could grow, you could cultivate, you could actually compound in pharmacies and sell this medicine as what it was, which was medicine. Hemp crops were actually the cash crops of America for a very long time in the beginning. And a lot of those farms were built off the backs of slaves. So then to come, full circle, and now, you're literally criminalizing something that you've profited off of as an industry, as an economy, and specifically target specific communities that helped to build that industry to what it was. it's just completely atrocious. And like the whole panel saying, there's still so much work to be done. Specifically, you have the legislative initiatives that obviously move very, very slowly when it comes to the impact that this situation has on all of the communities that have been affected by the war on drugs. But as an industry, you know, me being a person of color, working as an executive in the industry, I don't see a lot of people that look like me. I don't encounter a lot of people that share the same ideals that I share and passions when it comes to the injustices that have happened just from this industry being built. And there's also disparities there whenever it comes to leadership organizations finding the right candidates, really reaching out into communities to find the resources in those communities and see the people and the candidates for who they are and what they can bring to the table, rather than nepotism and where they come from, essentially. It's been very difficult. And so for me, I see the industry kind of being at like a standstill. But because we're living in a very visible time in our existence right now, we're very visible because of social media. There's so many different, you know, there's a smartphone in every person's hand, and it's very easy to document what's going on the ground level within businesses and what's also going on just legislatively. And there's not a lot of movement that's moving fast enough to really help the impacted communities. And as businesses, they profit off of this. You know, you profit off of being in a marketplace where there's not a lot of inclusion. There's specific groups that are at the top making millions and millions of dollars and pouring those millions of dollars back into wealthy families and back into the hands of people who have already been running these corporations for many years. Instead, I'm really happy to see that there's a lot of legislation being built around social equity programs that are now forcing the industry and forcing businesses to allocate specific license applications to minority communities, to people who are affected by the war on drugs, and specifically targeting revenue and tax revenue that's coming from the sales from the larger corporations and funding that back into communities that don't have the resources and don't have the access to capital, because we all know that this is federally illegal. So there's not, you know, a lot of resource there for institutional loans. You can't go that route. You absolutely have to go the route of knowing someone or having your own personal wealth that you can pull off of to be able to even jump into the industry and have, you know, some competition there, to where you're now taking a niche product and making it into more of a commoditized marketplace that's more diverse and more inclusive. So in my opinion, I think the industry can absolutely do more. There's definitely states that have taken those steps with social equity programs, but there's also the states that have struck down social equity clauses in their legislation. And we have to move past that to be able to see that certain communities were already set up in the beginning to fail and have to climb bigger hurdles in order to jump into the marketplace. And we give them a leg up and a hand out with all of the different initiatives that are going on with, you know, Last Prisoner Project, with all of the different projects and initiatives and associations that are coming together to really raise the awareness about these issues.
Yeah.